Welcome to this month's very special edition of Right on the Nail. I'm Chris Wright, and I'm delighted that you are able to join us today for what should be a particularly engaging episode. Well, there seems to be no doubt that British politics is in a total state of flux right now. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen from one day to the next, and never mind to predict who might be winning the next election, whether it takes place in under 4 years' time or even much sooner than that. The bookies are predicting that the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom will be Nigel Farage, with Reform leading in the polls ahead of Labour, with the Conservatives a pretty distant third, just a neck in front of the Lib Dems in fourth. And we're going to talk today about what kind of government we would have were Nigel Farage and Reform to form the next government, having won the next election. On the 8th attempt of running for Parliament, Farage was elected as the MP for Clacton, alongside 4 other Reform UK MPs, including the now independent MP for Great Yarmouth, Rupert Lowe, who is joining us today. Having worked extremely closely with Nigel Farage and now being politically divorced from him, further to the right, one might say, we are very grateful to Rupert Lowe for offering his time to provide his perspective on the Reform UK leader. Much more so on the other side of the political spectrum, we're also delighted to be joined by political commentator and Fleet Street's longest-serving political editor, holding the position at the Daily Mirror from 1986 until very recently, and I am, of course, talking about Nigel Nelson. And finally, we are delighted to be joined by the Merton and Wandsworth Labour London Assembly member since 2016, Leonie Cooper. Well, the polls don't lie, or do they? Because for the last few weeks, if not even for the last few months, the polls have been suggesting very strongly that Reform and Nigel Farage could well be the next government of the United Kingdom. They're currently on 27%, and this is a figure which is holding pretty firm, with Labour on 23%, the Conservative Party in the doldrums on 17% and seemingly going nowhere, and Lib Dems, who we know really aren't going to form the next government, on 15%, just a little bit behind the Conservative Party. So I'm joined today by people who can really talk about what a Reform UK government would look like, how Nigel Farage would be as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and what this would mean for all of us. So let's just fast forward, and we know the election might not be for another 3 or 4 years, and a lot can happen in 3 or 4 years. As we all know, a week is a long time in politics, but with things not moving much, let's assume that the next election happens and Nigel Farage is given the keys to 10 Downing Street, and there he is with 300 or 400 MPs, or maybe 250 MPs, whatever it takes, with the majority in Parliament, forming a new government. And we've had a little bit of an idea about what his policy adds up to. What will happen on day one of a Farage government? Now, Rupert, you would know quite a bit about this. So how do you think it's going to appear, and what would be the overall reaction from the world as a whole and from the financial markets? Do his sums add up to start off with?
Well, I'm not sure that was the main genesis of the issue between Nigel and I. I'm not sure they have actually got what I would call coherent policies, Chris. I don't know. I wrote in the last election, I wrote the farming, the business, and half the fisheries draft policy. It was a draft document. But I spent my time with Nigel winning the argument first. And once I thought we'd won the argument at the end of last year, I sat down with him and I said, right, what's the plan? And in order to not let down the British people, which I said I didn't want to be part of, I said, we need a shadow cabinet, we need a structure, and we need a plan. And I don't think that Reform has got that, in my view. So I think that was the genesis of the issue between us. Winning the election is only half the equation. What somebody's got to do is to actually change the way we're governed, because now I'm an MP for the mighty Great Yarmouth, which is a fantastic place. I realise that actually Parliament is pretty powerless. the front bench is pretty powerless. The power all is vested in the permanent secretaries, most of whom are pretty malign, and they are symptomatic of a civil service which has become woke. And it no longer is acting in the interests of the British people. It's acting in what they see as the interests of the sort of global need rather than British need.
Okay, well,
So,
Rupert,
so the answer is, Chris, I don't think Nigel's got policies that I'm aware of. And equally, I think he's surrounded by some very lightweight people who are not capable of delivering if he were to become Prime Minister, which I personally hope he doesn't.
Okay, well, let's dig into some of the detail. Let's look at the policies, and I'll bring Nigel in here to go through these in some detail. Nigel Farage's policies include things such as maintaining the welfare system pretty much as it is, investing significantly in defence, as everybody feels that we have to do. It also includes spending a lot more on policing and security in the country as a whole. If you add all of the sums up, then you're going to ask, where is the money going to come from? And we have a little bit of a Liz Truss on steroids moment here. So, Nigel, have you looked into this, and exactly what policies does he have that are going to cost money, and how are we going to finance it?
Yes, both of those are true. That there is a question of there's a huge cost on the things he has announced so far, and there was a big question about how he would pay for it. Now, if you take, for instance, his plan to increase the personal tax allowance to £20,000, everybody would love that. Sounds absolutely great. The kind of cost you're talking about is 40 billion. So it just isn't realistic. He talks about part nationalising water.
Yes.
Again, great idea. Costs there about 50 billion. It's the reason why Labour have not nationalised water, why they haven't nationalised energy. All they've been able to do is nationalise the trains, because the trains don't cost anything, on the basis you just wait for the franchises to run out. So the big problem I see with Nigel Farage's policies is just the sheer cost of them. And so I think basically it's impractical. I don't think he'll be Prime Minister. I agree. I tend to agree with Rupert on that. For a small party like Reform to actually make it would be a 10-year operation, so pretty much no chance for the next election. I don't see the electorate, for instance, turning around and electing 300 MPs with no experience of government, no experience of parliament, no experience of running the economy. And those are things that will count against Nigel at election time.
But he is Nigel. He's the bookies' favourite. The bookies' odds are very, very short odds that he will be the next government and he will be the next Prime Minister. And we should also throw into this scrapping inheritance tax is another thing as well, which is going to cost money. So and I'm going to bring Leonie in here as well, he's appealing to the country as a whole, saying, I'm going to do all of these wonderful things and we're all going to sign up to do it. And nobody knows how it's going to be funded. It's easy when you've never been a government to promise the earth, because you have no parameters in which to operate. So, Leonie, at the same time, what Nigel is doing, he's not really appealing to the right wing. He's appealing to your base as well. He's appealing to the traditional Labour voter, saying we're going to reduce tax, we're going to spend as much money as we can on everything that you want money spending on. Where's it going to come from? But your voters are the ones that are queuing up behind him just as much, if not more, than voters from the Conservative Party.
I don't think it's more. I think he's fishing in the voter pool of both the Conservative Party. I mean, if you look at where their poll rating has gone to, that's quite clear. If you look at defections, that's also mainly come from the Conservative Party in terms of councillors and people who've decided that they want to cross the floor. Andrea Jenkins was a Conservative MP before she became a Reform directly elected mayor. So I think there's a very strong appeal to a lot of Conservatives, but there is an appeal to some Labour people. It's a bit like UKIP. There were a lot of people were interested in UKIP who were usually Conservative voters, but there were some Labour voters who were also interested as well. And I think it's this point about hasn't been in government. And I always think of politicians as being either like painters. There are some painters who splash the paint onto the canvas. It's very messy, big brush strokes. And you may not even recognize what the picture is with some people, or there's some like Turner where it's all very misty and murky, and out of it sort of emerges a painting. And then there are other painters who do sort of huge amounts of detail, and it could almost be a photograph. And I think Nigel is great at sort of painting big brush strokes, and and a picture is sort of starting to emerge. But he's never been asked to sort of do, where does the money come from, or to do the sort of meticulous planning. And I think it was very interesting what Rupert was saying about sort of trying to sit down and say, well, let's kind of add it all up, and let's kind of come up with a real detailed program here. And then not really being able to do that. And I think I think he's really, really brilliant at comms. I think that's what Nigel does really, really well. A bit like Boris Johnson did comms fantastically, but then was a dreadful prime minister because he didn't do detail. Actually, in my manner, he was also not a very good mayor of London, but he appeared to be a great mayor of London because he did the comms and being, the showman, but he wasn't very good on the detail in City Hall. So,
but he was still very popular.
yes, I think
And
that's the problem.
sometimes popularity has got nothing to do
Yeah.
with the detail.
And
And I
that's
just I
I
wonder.
agree.
I mean, with Jeremy Corbyn's new party, and
Mm.
with Rupert, with, I won't say your new party, but with your new grouping, or your new pressure group.
Got a movement, Chris. It's
Your
a
new
unifying
movement.
force.
Okay,
A unifying force,
let's
not a
call it a
divisive force.
movement. I mean, Nigel, are we moving completely away from a two-party system? Are we moving to a point where we could have the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn's party, the Conservative Party, Nigel Farage, Rupert's movement, the Lib Dems, the Greens, of course? Are we moving to a point where we're going to be like some of the European countries, where every government will be a coalition of different parts?
Well, I think that will depend an awful lot on whether or not any of these small parties actually survive. You've got to remember what happened to the SDP back in the 1980s. They were actually obviously politically different, but very much like Reform. They won a stunning by-election in Crosby for Shirley Williams. In their first local elections, they got more than 1,000 councillors. They were about the same kind of level in the polls as Reform is now. And plus that, which in fact Reform doesn't have, they had four political big hitters. The SDP didn't survive for 7 years. It finally collapsed. And most of that is down to our first past the post system, which notoriously is unkind to small parties.
Well, it looks like that, but then the first past the post system is currently predicting that Reform, a small party with currently, I believe, is it 5 MPs they have now? They had 5, they lost one with.
Yeah, they've got 4 now, Chris.
But then they gain another one somewhere.
No, they've dropped.
They've dropped another, and another one's left under.
They went 5 to 4 to 5 to 4. So
yes, that's right. 4 MPs.
The resistance at 5.
Yes,
but look. I mean, I think, to Nigel's point, I think the biggest problem we've got is the state's too big. So a bit like Elon Musk bought Twitter and fired 80% of the staff, and it now works better. I think that's the starting point. As to your point about people not having experience, I don't think that counts for anything. What we need is people who've got experience of the real world, not experience of the tittle-tattle that circulates around Westminster. As I said, the power doesn't lie with the elected body. The elected body's become a bit like the EU. It's just a charade to keep people thinking there's actually somebody there running the country. The country is run by the unelected permanent secretaries. People like Antonio Romeo, people like that, who are eminence grises. They're the ones who are actually putting into place these damaging policies, which are actually undermining Britain. So I think, to your point about, is the country going to forgive the Reds and the Blues for making a cock of it, starting with Tony Blair? The answer is no. The public's had enough of the malign Blairite legislation, which is the genesis of the cancer which has destroyed Britain. It's also had enough, as you say, of the showman like Boris, who got an 80-seat majority and didn't repeal all that legislation, and singularly failed to do anything other than make bad decisions throughout COVID. So I think the British public's had enough. The question is, do one of those parties shed the skin they've currently got and bring in a sort of a new, what I would call rejuvenating force, which allows them to win? Or do we end up with some form of new party which does pull together proper, able people who are going to make long-term decisions that are in the interests of the British people? And I don't think any of us on this podcast, on your wonderful Right on the Nail podcast, Chris, I don't think any of us today can say quite how the cards are going to drop. But the public are not going to forgive the Tories and Labour for the way in which they have failed to deliver for the country.
We might all have our different opinions on this, and I'm going to ask everybody. But Rupert, who was the last Prime Minister that was good?
Maggie Thatcher.
Okay, we disagree on that.
John Major was just a farce.
Okay, Nigel, who was the last Prime Minister?
We should have had your mate Neil Kinnock running the country, Chris. We'd have never had another Labour government again.
Yeah, well, Neil Kinnock didn't run the country, but Tony Blair didn't do it.
Because John Major won on his soapbox.
Tony Blair didn't do a bad job. I'm not sure that Gordon Brown did a bad job either. Nigel, who was the last good Prime Minister we had in your view?
Okay, the two best prime ministers of my lifetime have been Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher. And the reason for that, while very different in politics, the reason for that is they had proper political, philosophical foundations. Tony Blair, in his third way policies, that actually worked, the idea of merging ideas from the right and the left. In Margaret Thatcher, her belief in the free market, both of those things underpinned everything they did. We haven't had a prime minister since, or in the interim, who've done those things.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I kind of agree with you. I mean, they had fundamental beliefs that they thought very strongly about, that they thought would have significant positive impact on the country, and they did have impact on the country. Whether we think it was positive, might depend on which side of the equation you fall on. But I agree with what you're saying. But when you look at the last lot of MPs we've had, and you would say Keir Starmer, I mean, Leonie may disagree, but he's not doing great. He's doing good in some areas. He's not a huge success, whichever way you look at it. Before that, Rishi Sunak wasn't. Boris Johnson certainly wasn't. Liz Truss, oh my God. Theresa May, no. We haven't had great prime ministers for a while, have we? Do we all agree on that or not?
I don't think you can really judge Keir yet because he's literally only been there for a year. And I don't think anybody could have predicted some of the international stuff like Donald Trump and his tariff. It's like the hokey cokey, in, out, up, down, shake it all around. I think that's been a very difficult backdrop. But I do, if you're asking me, who do I think the most consequential prime ministers have been post-war? I think Clement Attlee, because of all the immense changes that were brought in under the Attlee 45 onwards government, and Margaret Thatcher. I think those two have been the most consequential. I think Blair and then Brown built on what Attlee did in many ways, although slightly steered the ship in a different way. But I don't think we can tell yet with Keir. What I do think they need to do, to come back to my previous point about comms, is I really think they need to improve the communication of what they're doing, because they're not communicating some of the really good things that they're doing. Nobody knows about them because they're just not communicating properly. You can't do it and then not tell people, because you might as well have not have done it in the first place.
Tell us what they are, Leonie. I mean, giving away the Chagos Islands that we already own and then paying 18 billion for the privilege of leasing them back, that a good deal? Tell us what they've done that's good.
Rupert, I must say that is not something that gets raised with me on the doorstep on a regular basis, just as changing the voting.
So what have they done that you think is good?
So what have they done which I think are good? I think some of the stuff that they've we were just talking about the railways. I think introducing the changes to water regulation, although I would like to see them going further. I think what they've been doing around I think changing the voting age, following through on things that you put in your manifesto is always a good thing. But I don't think, some of the changes in terms of the health service of bringing down the waiting lists isn't really getting as much coverage as the doctors deciding that they want to go on strike again. So I think it is different.
Well, you think dropping the voting age to 16 is a good thing, Leonie? I can't believe you said that.
I really do think if you have young people who are aged between 16 and 18 who are having civics lessons in school and are being prepared so that they understand the voting system, I think that would be a really good way to start to engage people more in being interested in voting. I think it does have to go hand in hand with an increased focus on it in schools. Yes, I don't think you could just...
He's done that, though, because he thinks it's going to benefit him. That's why he's done that. You know that. But actually, he's wrong. He's wrong because the biggest support base for Reform and Now for Restore Britain, my movement, are the Gen Zs and the young. They've had enough of all this nonsense that's being preached at them in schools, and they're turning on people big time. So I think he's got that very badly wrong. But I personally think people at 16 don't know which way is up. So I totally disagree with you that that's a good move. It's a terrible move.
Well, in which case they shouldn't be allowed to join the army or get married or many of the other things that you can do when you're 16. I mean, I don't see that emasculating people from being able to vote is a good thing.
I don't think they're being emasculated. They're just not being able to vote till they know which way is up.
Well, I think it's the right thing to do, and I think therefore it should be done. Whether it provides benefit for Labour or for your party or for any other party. I mean, sometimes, doing the right thing isn't necessarily just to do with what you think your political benefit might be. And I think in this case...
Well, I don't know about you, Leonie. You may have known all the answers at 16. I definitely didn't.
Okay.
I
Well,
don't think many people do.
Leonie, if you're on the doorstep and you clearly are someone who does do that,
yeah,
and you're talking to a 16, 17-year-old, which subjects are most important to them on the doorstep?
Well, it varies. For some people, they're very engaged with international matters. I lead on environmental issues at City Hall. I'm currently chairing the London Assembly Environment Committee. Environmental issues are of massive concern to a lot of young people. They're worried about the future. So I think
you would have thought so, but I'm not even sure. You would have thought young people would have been worried about environmental issues and the world that we're going to be living in 30, 40 years' time, which isn't going to matter too much to me, and probably not that much to even Nigel or Rupert as well. But you'd have thought to young people, but I'm not sure that young people are engaged in politics as much as they used to be. I mean, and let me ask you, whilst you're on the doorstep, because I want to come on to this, because it is the biggest thing which seems to be affecting how people might vote, and that is illegal immigration in general, and illegal immigration. To what extent is a 16-year-old involved in that conversation?
No, there'd be much more. I mean, the other issues beyond that would be sometimes people raise things like, the nighttime economy, as you might call it, for them, going out and having a good time and clubbing and things that people are interested in. But the overwhelming sort of, big issue that gets raised, certainly, and I'm a London representative, so this might be different outside of London, is about housing and the cost of housing, and the fact that a lot of young people are still being forced to live at home because they can't afford to buy somewhere, and they can't even now afford to rent somewhere. So that is much more likely. I don't think anybody, I don't think I've ever spoken to a 16, 17-year-old about immigration has ever come up as an issue.
Can't get a job, Leonie. They cannot even get a job.
Quite a lot of people have got jobs, actually.
Not many, not the young.
They have.
Well, Rupert, how many of the young want jobs? That's another point. I mean, But a lot
Well,
of them don't have jobs. Do they all want jobs? Are we living in a world where people don't want jobs anymore?
Well, I think, Chris, there is still a body of people who do want to work and do subscribe to the view that busy hands are happy hands. There's equally a growing number of people who have been encouraged through the DWP and other sort of malign organs of the state that they should consider it fine to sit at home with mental health issues, which in our day we would have been told just to get on with it. And as a result of that, you've got 9 million people of working age who aren't working. So, and then we're told we need labour to come into the country. So they bring in lots of legal migrants, which Boris did, but also lots of illegal migrants who, as we all know, go and work for Deliveroo and work in the sort of shadow economy, which in itself undermines those people who pay their taxes and collect lots of taxes for the state. So the whole thing is actually, the more you look at it, the more it's a complete mess and it needs a total overhaul. And I disagree with Leonie. Most young people do care about the fact they can't get a job. I've got 4 children and they find it very difficult to get a job. They're very well educated, they're clever, but with AI, with all sorts of new developments taking place, it's very difficult to get a full-time job. And with Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner passing ridiculous legislation on workers' rights and all the other nonsense that they're labelling on, they seem to overlook the fact that actually the workforce is a function of the people who employ them as well. So, no, I do. I think it's a big concern. I think anyone who doesn't realize that, I've been amazed by how right-wing the Gen Zs are. They're much more right-wing than me, and wouldn't be difficult to be more right-wing than you, Chris, but they're definitely more right-wing than you are. So no, I think it's fascinating, and I unless you're on the front line and talking to these people, you don't know that.
That's interesting. Now let's talk, Nigel. Let's talk a little bit about immigration and illegal immigration, because it does seem this has been around for a while. The boats and people coming in on boats. It's illegal immigration throughout the whole world is a problem. Now Trump says he's cured it in America by building a wall and by being really tough on people, making it a really hostile environment, and it stopped illegal immigration completely. Now, whether it has or not, I don't know, but it's had some success at a price. Now, in terms of the political spectrum as a whole, if someone can fix illegal immigration, and we'll talk about legal immigration in a minute, but if someone can fix illegal immigration, are they then going to have the route to forming the next government? Is it all down to who can do that? And what can be done to solve this problem? Or is it an insolvable problem for the whole of the world and certainly the whole of Europe?
It's not insolvable, but it's not there are no short-term solutions. So the first thing we've got to accept is that we're not going to stop the boats. We might have mitigations to reduce them. The idea of tackling the smuggling gangs, there are 80 investigations going on at the moment against them. That might reduce the number of migrants coming across. But no, that there is a long-term solution, but it relies on mixing together some of the things that have already been tried. For instance, making migrants who cross the Channel inadmissible to this country and then processing them elsewhere. But that means a major change in our laws. At the moment, you can only claim asylum at a British border or on British soil. That's what is encouraging people to come across. Then you've got to find a country that's prepared to do that kind of processing. Once you change that law, that means that you've got to find a country that's prepared to have, say, 40,000 people crossing their borders to do it. So it's really difficult. At the moment, Reform are big on immigration, but really don't have any answers to it any more than anybody else. The idea about detaining and deporting, and of course, this is one of Rupert's big ideas. How do you do it? Deport to where? Do you deport them to countries where they'll be executed? That just wouldn't work. The idea of sending...
But Nigel, I've already told people that the solution, and I don't agree with you, it's very easily soluble if you have the will to do it. The problem is we haven't got a leadership. They're soft and they don't have the will to do it.
Where do you deport them to?
The fact of the matter is,
where do you deport them to, Rupert?
The first thing you do, let me answer your question. The first thing you do is you don't give them any money. You don't give them new mobile phones. You don't help them across the
So
border. They travel
you go
across.
destitute
They
on
travel across
Britain Street.
multiple safe countries to get here. You know that. Secondly, you detain them, as Australia. Australia have shown us how to do it, and I have said
Australia is a
publicly, and
completely
I'll
different
I'll
system to
say it
us.
again. We've got some very good West Coast islands off both England and Scotland. You put up a tented camp. You take them onto those islands and you put
These
them
things have
there
all been
with a
looked at.
bowl of porridge
The Tory
until they
government did that.
decide they want to go home. I'm sorry, that's how you have to do it.
No, I'm
And
saying,
it's
Rupert,
deliverable.
it is completely unrealistic. The Tory government
Why?
did look at those very things. First of all, you've got to create
Why?
the.
It's on British sovereign land. You're
Let,
not.
let Nigel
In
talk,
theory,
Rupert.
in theory, that would work, but the problem is you then have to create the entire infrastructure to be able to keep these people. When they looked into that, when the Home Office looked into doing that, they found the cost was just prohibitive.
Well, that's dribble. I'm
Well,
sorry,
I'm
that's
sorry,
dribble.
it's not, because
What is the cost of putting him in a 4-star hotel, Nigel? Come on,
well,
much more than
in fact,
putting him in a tent.
the cost of putting them in a 4-star hotel is actually less than it would have cost to send them to Rwanda. You could have kept somebody in a 4-star hotel for 43 years.
That's changing. That's
compared
changing
to
the
what
subject.
Rwanda did.
Rwanda was simply a deterrent. You know that, Nigel.
Well,
And it
we
was silly.
never
It was
found out.
silly. It was silly of the Labour government to chuck it out. We'd spent quite a lot of
We
money
never
on it.
found out whether it would be a deterrent, but it would certainly be an expensive one. We spent £700 million.
It's got nothing to do with
Sending
building.
no one there
You
apart
just
from
said.
4 volunteers.
You
And it
just
would have
said,
cost
but building
£10
a
billion
tented
in
camp's
total.
pretty cheap, Nigel. Building a tented camp's pretty cheap. And when people go to pop festivals, they actually leave their tents and litter the pop festival because tents are so cheap.
I don't
Those
think
aren't proper tents. You're not, you know,
They are good enough tents. And
they're
at
for
the end of the day,
one night
don't
in the
come
middle of
here
summer,
illegally.
for weekends.
when you're not going to.
Do not come here illegally. That's the answer.
But we all
But-
agree
but-
with that. We all agree with that. The question is actually how to do it. And
I just told you. Emily Maitlis was shocked. Emily Maitlis was shocked.
What I'm saying to you is I don't think that what you're proposing is realistic, any more than Reform's idea is you simply take them back to France. The only way you can do that is with the agreement of the French government, which is in fact what Labour are working on at the moment with their one out, one in scheme, which would send people who shouldn't be here back to France again.
Nigel, that won't work. The French have never honoured any agreement they've made with us. We pay them £500 million a year, and they actually help people come over here. Come on, it's a nonsense, the whole thing. And the French don't care. They are punishing the British people for a democratic vote to leave the European Union, which, by the way, was an extremely wise move.
Rupert,
and
why
hasn't
do you
been
think people
followed.
why do people go to Calais?
Let's not go down there. I mean, the illegal immigration is a problem throughout the whole world. I think people in England or people in the UK are under the impression that it is simply a UK problem with people on boats and it doesn't affect anybody else. The fact is, it affects any economy which is better than another economy next door where there are people that are suffering. It affects Chile with a good economy with people in South America trying to get into Chile, never mind people getting into England. It affects Greece, it affects Italy, it affects Spain, it affects France. And it's going to get worse because there are people living in places that are becoming more and more uninhabitable, especially with climate change and global warming. And you're going to get more and more of these economic migrants, which is what they are. How do you solve it? I have no idea. But you're all coming up with different solutions, but none of them appear to really work. Is there a solution that really would work?
No one's tried a solution that works yet, Chris, because they are actually not doing anything about it. It's almost as if, we're welcoming people from different cultures with different beliefs, different skill sets. A lot of them have got very low IQs. We are actually doing ourselves. We're self-harming. That's what we're doing.
They haven't all.
And by the way,
So
this is
I
completely
think there are some
solid.
examples.
Right, Leonie, let's get your views. Come on.
I think there are some examples. I mean, if you listen to the latest news about the origin of where people come from, and they are in the main economic migrants, I completely agree with you on that. I mean, there are some
Totally.
people some people who are seeking asylum from dreadful situations that they're trying to escape from. But at one point, we had a very large number of people who were all coming from Albania. And we then went into returning people, rounding them up and sending them back to Albania. And I think the message then became quite strong that coming from Albania to the UK would just result in you being sent home. And I think in some cases where you can send people back to a country that is safe, it may not be economically as developed as this country, but if it is safe, then I think returning people sends a huge message to other people who might be thinking about making that journey in the first place and getting into the hands of the gangs of the people smugglers. I think returning people to France and getting that message out that even if you do cross the channel, and I understand why Rupert is expressing some skepticism, but the relationship between the previous government and the French, or previous governments and the French during the course of the Brexit negotiations and departure was not good. But I think that's one of the reasons why Keir Starmer and the team have been trying to do something to set up this one in, one out, and try and make it work with the French in a much more proactive way. And again, I think if people, hear that they are going to be stopped either on the beaches in France or they'll get to the UK and then be sent back to France, that starts to get the message out through their networks, their personal networks, to say, don't bother. I mean, it is, as you say, Chris, I was in Sicily last year and they've got one of those rescue boats, which is quite controversial, was moored in the harbour there at Siracusa, where I was. And there are huge numbers of people crossing the Mediterranean to Italy and Spain and Greece literally all the time. So it isn't just people trying to cross the channel. And it is something that we do need the rest of Europe to be thinking about how they address it. And it's not helped by, some people deciding that they're going to sort of not be responsible about trying to persuade people to stay where they are and make a life for themselves somewhere else that isn't undertaking these incredibly perilous journeys. That's the on the illegal immigration side. You said you also wanted to talk about legal immigration, and I think that's possibly even more complicated and actually involves much larger numbers of people, of course.
Well, it did. I mean, why, Nigel, did the Boris Johnson government let in almost 1 million per year legal immigrants, mainly from Africa and Bangladesh? Why? What prompted them to do that?
Well, one example would be letting in students with their families. So what Boris Johnson wanted to do was fund the universities, and foreign students pay an awful lot more in tuition fees than British students, up to about £30,000. So what then happened was they set a target of 600,000 foreign students to come in by the end of the decade. That was abandoned by Rishi Sunak because, of course, they wanted to bring their dependents with them. So the whole point about legal immigration is that we have to actually design it so it works for the economy. Now, at the moment, if you tried to do the mass deportation that Rupert's talking about, your social care system would collapse. 1 in 3 social care workers are migrants. The NHS would collapse. 1 in 5 NHS workers are migrants. So what you've got to do is try and find a balance of what the economy needs, but not then overdo it. As Leonie just said, it's a complicated process, but probably not impossible.
Are we and are our governments in general being honest with the British public about the whole question of immigration, both illegal and legal?
Well, I mean, the whole that I've just said, I don't. The idea of stopping the boats, I think, is just unrealistic. We're going to have to live with that and just try and bring the numbers down and find out ways of doing it. To do that requires a huge international effort. When it comes to legal migration, well, I mean, if you could actually work it on the basis of what the economy needs, there shouldn't be a problem. The problem seems to be the numbers have gone shooting up. And then we find mitigations to try and bring them down, like stopping students bringing in dependents. Then you have the problem of the students then don't want to come here, and the universities are complaining they don't have the funding. That's going to mean higher tuition fees for British students.
Right. And Rupert, you were talking about youth unemployment. Now, and Nigel's telling us about the extent to which the care homes and the NHS, the health sector, are dependent on immigrant labour. Can you see a situation where you don't have the immigrant labour working in the care homes and where British people are happy to do those jobs?
Well, firstly, can I go back to Leonie's point? I don't trust Keir Starmer to negotiate anything. I mean, his idea of negotiating is to give the other side exactly what they want.
That's not my question.
The second, well, on that point, while Nigel was talking, we've got 9 million people, as I said, of working age who aren't working. They're not working, Chris. So therefore, you've got a huge pool of people who are economically unproductive because they choose to sign themselves off very easily through the DWP. I've got somebody running my office in Great Yarmouth. He's a fantastic guy. We're right on top of all the casework. Used to work for the DWP for 23 years. I mean, he got so bored of handing out money like confetti to everybody who actually said they had a health ailment or they had mental health issues. They've got the Motability scam that's going on that now accounts for about 14% of new car registrations. Look, we have a completely dysfunctional state. That's where all our money's going. It's got nothing to do with needing to bring immigrants in. That's a load of absolute poppycock. What you've got to do is incentivize people to work and disincentivize people from coming in here illegally. And by the way, Nigel, it's not an international issue. I don't care about the international issue. We voted to restore our sovereign borders when the British people, 17.4 million of them, voted in 2016 to take back their sovereignty. That's what they wanted. They wanted their borders. I don't think it's an international issue. This seems to be the problem. Our elite seems to think we have a right to look after everybody internationally. No, their job is to look after the British people. And so, Chris, with a will, there is a solution to all this stuff. The problem is we don't have the will to do it.
Yeah, but we do live in an international community, and we have to then cooperate with our neighbours. And the only way of finding a solution is to be.
We're an island. We're an island, Nigel. We're an island. We're an island. We don't have a continental border like the rest of Europe.
We may be an island, Rupert, but it's only 21 miles or 23 miles across, and you can get across in a little boat.
It saved us from Herr Hitler, Chris, didn't it?
That was a long time ago. We can't go back. We can't keep living in the past.
So no, I'm sorry. There's a lack of will, and we've got this post-war European socialist dream, which you probably subscribe to, which I don't. That, we needed to get rid of the nation state and we needed to create this global world, this village, which is now sort of become the World Economic Forum playground, which is the root cause of a lot of our problems. And we've got to, the British people voted, they don't want that. They do not want that. And that's where there is a disjoint between the elites and the British electorate.
The British people voted by 51.8 to 48.2, whatever it was, %.
Yeah. And if the government hadn't sent round
to leave the European Union,
it would have been 60-40.
In part because they voted to stop immigrant labour coming in from Poland and Eastern Europe and Italy and Portugal. Instead, we had at that point in time, I think, 180,000 net legal immigration, most of it from the EU. We replaced it under Boris Johnson within 2 years by 950 million coming in from Africa and Asia. And the reason was because we needed that. So
they just wanted a sovereign nation back.
Whatever they voted for.
They wanted their own sovereign nation back. That's what they wanted.
Okay, well, they wanted their own sovereign nation back, but it has no effect on people coming in on boats. The
fact the government then mismanaged Brexit is not there. That's of no relevance to the vote for Brexit at all.
Nigel,
and the European Union wanted to punish us for it.
Am I right in thinking that if someone can solve this problem, which may be unsolvable, they will be applauded very loudly by the British public?
You're right, Chris. It's about immigration.
Right,
Leonie, that is the issue.
Leonie, now how is Keir Starmer going to solve this problem then? And if that's an essential part of him retaining
Yes.
his government in in
Yes.
3 or 4 years' time.
No question about it. Over the next 4 years before 2029 in the next general election, there are two pieces of evidence that I think the British people will look at very, very closely. One is they will look at those people from Reform UK who have taken control of county councils, Kent County Council, Warwickshire, and they will look at the directly elected mayors and they will see how competent they are or how incompetent they are, and they will use evidence as to how they have actually run things, because there are now actually existing examples of what reform is doing where it is controlling things. And secondly, they will also look at the British government run by Keir Starmer as the Prime Minister. And one of the things that they will measure is going to be, has there been success in terms of dealing with both legal and illegal immigration, along with a list of other things like sorting out the NHS, sorting out the housing crisis, and so on and so forth. I mean, there will be an analysis to be made in 4 years' time. And I do think, that there has been a good start made. I mean, if you look at what Yvette Cooper has been talking about, the number of people who've been returned, I mean, I would like to see nobody being put up in a hotel, 4-star or otherwise. And I think most of those people would quite like to have their cases dealt with more quickly. The ludicrous pursuit of the previous government, which was we're going to reduce the people who work in the Home Office and do the processing, has meant that we've ended up with these backlogs because there's been no staff to assess their cases. We really need to get a move on, get a wriggle on in terms of assessing people. Nobody wants people trapped in these hotels, and they don't get very much money, and they shouldn't get very much money. They should be being dealt with and not being trapped in that way. But I think the legal immigration situation does also need to be dealt with. Are we the right place to have large influxes of people coming into this country from, however worthy the causes are? And I think a lot of people opened their hearts to people from Ukraine. There was also the situation with Hong Kong. We have also encouraged some people to come here to work. And I do think some of the people, and this is maybe why I agree with Rupert a bit. I think having people sitting at home not doing anything is bad for their mental health. So no wonder they have poor mental health, and they should be encouraged maybe to work part time or to start volunteering and doing stuff like that. I mean, I'm a trustee of a charity that runs charity shops, and we have people that we bring in, and they maybe start on 1 or 2 days a week volunteering. They maybe move on into doing limited hours, and then gradually you start to bring people back into employment. And I think that needs to be part of the benefit system, is to encourage people back gradually into employment, and then eventually people can take up either full-time roles or work half a week doing those caring roles, working in shops, whatever it is. But I think that's really important, that we don't
Yeah,
write people off, that we are encouraging them all the time not to just sit at home and not do anything. I think that is a plague.
yeah. Nigel, we have more in common than we thought then, in general, around the table.
Yeah, we do. I mean, the whole thing is, I think all of us agree that immigration in particular needs to be controlled. I mean, it's not racist to want to control your borders. And I think that we all agree that actually should happen. The problem is finding a solution. I've not heard a single political party come up with something that is a solution to it. And obviously, it will have to be sorted out internationally, whatever Rupert says. I don't think that Brexit meant we pull up the drawbridge on Britain and never deal with anybody else in the future. People voted
How
Brexit.
you used to have in the past, Nigel. We traded with the rest of the world. That's what drove us. Trade.
That's
It's why we
fine.
won Waterloo and we traded.
Well,
You
yeah,
don't have to draw the drawbridge up. You don't equally have to be part of a post-war borderless Europe to be able to trade with them.
and I'm not
They
saying
chose
that.
not. They chose to punish
I'm not
us.
saying that.
You know that.
Brexit was about, in Dominic Cummings' immortal words, taking back control. It was about sovereignty. I understand why people voted for Brexit. That's fine, but we still have to work with the rest of the world. We can't imagine that we are living in total isolation because we're a little island.
But the two are entirely separate issues.
Yeah, well, we're
I'm
not.
afraid.
We're not.
You don't need to conflate the two of them. They're
No,
different
we're
issues.
not reliving the Brexit wars. We're trying to talk about the issues that are affecting the country today, and the fact that we may or may not have a closer economic trading relationship with Europe is a good thing, but it's irrelevant to the overall discussion. The discussion is
So, Chris, let me ask you. Can I ask you a question? So we're talking about the state and what they can do and everything else. So you tell me. I've done a crowdfunder on the rape gangs, as I call them.
Yeah.
And we're finding this has been happening in at least 100 towns and cities across the UK. It's endemic it's everywhere. And yet the state crossed the street, looking the other way, while millions of white working class girls were being systematically raped by Pakistani men. Now, you tell me, why didn't the state deal with this pervasive evil? You tell me the answer to that, and then you can probably understand why it's doing nothing about the rest of it. Why didn't it deal with it?
I mean, you say millions. Was it really millions?
Oh yes, this is linked to county lines, and they knew that if they linked all the police computers, this would be absolutely clear. Now the government, we've played a part in forcing the government to have a statutory inquiry into this. This has been going on since 2000, and it is a national blot on our history. And yet, because to Nigel's point, these people were frightened of being called racist. They were frightened that the post-war multicultural experiment was going to fail, or we're going to seem to have failed, which it clearly has, in my opinion. And they were worried also about the Labour bloc vote. So it's mainly in Labour wards, a lot of it. But it's a national scandal, Chris, and it hasn't yet come out. So why have the police, the social services, the NHS, they all knew this was happening. Why have they allowed this to continue? So why don't we go to the root of something that's so straightforward, that should have been dealt with very, very early on, and it's got bigger and bigger, and nobody's doing anything about it. So that shows you the systemic failure of the state.
I'm sorry, Rupert. I really think you're missing out on one of the issues that relates to all of this. And the fact that, it is men who've been hiding in plain sight, not just Pakistani men. Why hasn't...
Leonie, it is predominantly Pakistani, Afghanistani, and Bangladeshi men.
Sorry, can you just let me finish my point? Thanks very much.
No, but you can't conflate it with everything else. It's
I'm sorry, can you let me finish my point?
Let Leonie talk, and
I think it's really important to remember that this also applies to the Church of England, and not just since the year 2000. And where is the horror and the outrage about all those priests doing all of this? I'm afraid it also applies to...
Oh, come on, that's Leonie.
Can you let me finish? It also applies to the Catholic Church. We've just seen 2 presenters on MasterChef sacked. Donald Trump is, in a very difficult situation in America, with a lot of people calling for the Epstein files. I have no idea if they exist or not. But, this is actually a fact about men hiding in plain sight, not just Pakistani men. There are also baby farms in Nigeria. I could go around the whole world and talk about...
You're crossing the street, Leonie, and I'm sorry, but you're talking...
I'm sorry,
we're doing a lot of work on this. I can tell you are completely wrong.
Rupert, let her talk.
Muslim
She's saying some
men
very...
of Pakistani origin,
I'm sorry,
from one part of Pakistan.
We had a paedophile at my school.
Happening.
Leonie, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say.
We had a paedophile at my school who was the deputy head, and he preyed on young boys who were, their voices hadn't dropped, and they hadn't, they were all prepubescent. He used to take them up to his office and take their trousers down and then beat them while he enjoyed himself. We all tried to report this, Rupert, as children, aged 11.
Do you not think there's a problem with the rape gangs?
Rupert, let Leonie talk.
So
this is a completely irrelevant story.
Sorry, it's not.
I can understand where she's going.
It's
irrelevant, Chris.
There are
lots of paedophiles.
I'm sorry, this is the same situation as women who've reported domestic abuse over the years and have not been listened to, children who've tried to report that things are being done to them that are just hideous, and all of us, women and children, have found that nobody has listened. Nobody listened when people reported what Jimmy Savile was doing. Nobody has listened to the voices of women and children. whether they're reporting that it's
So
Pakistan.
you don't think there's an issue with Asian rape
I'm not
gangs? Is that what
saying
you're
that
saying?
there has
Yes,
not been
Rupert,
an
she's
issue.
saying
I'm
it's all
saying it's a
it's
wider
part of a
issue.
wider issue. That's
I'm
what
saying it's
she's
a
No,
saying.
wider
Chris.
issue.
No, Chris. That's. I'm
Well, you're
sorry.
just
That's
wrong.
the
No,
sort
it
of.
is. I
That's
mean,
the sort of Emily Maitlis view.
You're
If you
wrong.
go on with persist with that
You're wrong.
nonsense, it will carry on.
No,
I'm
it
no.
sorry.
needs
It's
to be.
rubbish.
It needs
It's
to
a
be
sort of
looked into
delusion.
in
It's a sort of
all of these
delusion that modern
areas.
Britain's capable of.
All I'm saying is it's not specific to Pakistani men. There are many men in other walks of life who need to be investigated as much.
Yes.
There's no point in me, if
Bigger.
you think that, Leonie, there's no point in continuing this conversation. It is predominantly Pakistani Muslim men who are operating these rape gangs. And
Yes,
if you
but
don't think that's the case, you are deeply deluded.
no, she
I'm
does
sorry.
think she's not
I'm
saying
not
that's not
saying
the
that.
case. She's saying
I'm
it's
not saying
part
that.
Of
of a
course, there are other people
it's,
who of course there are other people who perpetrate bad things. But
exactly that.
this is a national scandal that the establishment has turned a blind eye to for the reasons
There
I've
are going
given
to be
you.
a
They're
series of
frightened of being called
inquiries.
racist, largely,
Okay,
and
you've made
it's not good
Rupert. We
enough.
understand the point you're making.
Yeah.
Leonie's making not a very good point as well, which I take on board entirely. Nigel, can you?
Well, look, child abuse, wherever it's coming from, is a national scandal. Rupert is right about the rape gangs. It's appalling the way that it was ignored for so long. Leonie is absolutely right that child abuse is actually everywhere, and certainly it's not the majority of abusers are not Pakistani. The majority of the abusers are white British. The
We live in a majority white
the
country,
important thing, Rupert, the
Nigel.
important thing is to actually protect children in the future. That's why the Alexis J report was so essential.
Yeah.
That covered the whole area. Her key recommendation was a child protection authority.
Yeah.
I hope the Labour government, despite the fact that they're holding another inquiry, will bring in that child protection authority as soon as possible.
Soon as possible. Totally agree. Totally agree.
Okay, well, good.
The truth will out. You will see.
Okay, now let's come back to where we started and let's talk about Nigel Farage and Reform forming the next government. What is the probability of it, and what kind of government will it be?
Depends what happens over the next 4 years in terms of what Reform really does in running things, and also how well the Labour government is able to deal with the big issues, the big hot button issues that the electorate are interested in. If the government is successful, and also if Reform proves to be wobbly, then I think the chances are very, very small. I think if Farage did come in, then I think the sort of the waving the paintbrush around, you'd probably end up with something as chaotic as the Boris Johnson led government. Great communicators, both of them, bad on detail, and I don't think would be able to run the country.
Is it a two-horse race between Reform and Labour at this point?
I would say that Reform and Labour are ahead in the race. I wouldn't say it's a two-horse race completely. However, I've got no idea why the Tories selected Kemi Badenoch. I actually served as an Assembly member with her. She was in the London Assembly 2016 and 17 when I was there, and I was astonished that they chose her. I think she's been a really poor leader, but never underestimate the Conservatives' power to change their leader and also reinvent and reinvigorate themselves. So I wouldn't rule them out from coming back from where they are at the moment, which is almost dead. I can't see the Liberal Democrats or the Greens forming, a government.
No.
So at the moment, I'd say Labour and Reform probably in the lead.
Two-horse race, Nigel, at this point?
Well, we'll have to see, but on the basis that I think that Reform are doing well in the polls at the moment because they're the new kids on the block, they carry no baggage of past mistakes, and it's born out of disillusion with the Tories and disappointment with Labour. So, yes, in the event that Labour don't get their act together over the next 4 years, it will be a two-horse race between Reform and Labour. I don't think Reform will actually do it, and I do think it will take them 10 years, if they last that long, to get their own act together.
Okay, Rupert, two-horse race?
Well, I don't think any of us know, Chris. As I say, the default vote now is to vote for Reform because nobody's going to vote for Labour or the Tories. And I think Labour, contrary to what Leonie says, I don't agree. I think they've done some very damaging things. I'm just waiting for the economy to collapse, which it's on the verge of doing as a result of these nonsensical tax rises and the workers' rights, which, as you're seeing, a direct effect on employment as a result of that. Why would you employ anybody when you've got all these ridiculous new legislation which is making employment questionable? So I think what none of us know is who's going to emerge as the alternative. What I think is interesting is I think the historic vote is now a floating vote. And therefore, if somebody comes up with some sensible suggestion which catches the imagination of the British people and they can show that they're capable of delivering it, then I think we are in for, well, I believe we are going to see political revolution. If nothing new comes along, the default vote is reform with all its deficiencies.
And can you see a route back into reform for yourself, Rupert?
Not after being politically assassinated, Chris.
If you were there, you would be Bookie's favourite to be the next Chancellor of the Exchequer right now.
Well, I'm in the betting to be the next Prime Minister, extraordinarily.
Okay.
I mean, a rookie like me who's come into politics at the age of 67, having had lots of business experience. Oh dear, all I do in Parliament is sit there and speak the truth, which is something that Parliament hasn't seen very much of. So I think, I just don't think any of us know, but would I work with Farage again? No. Would I work with Tice again? No. Definitely wouldn't work with Lee Anderson or the vile Mohammed Ziauddin Yusuf, who was the architect of the false accusations against me. So no, I don't see myself working with any of those people. Do I think there are some good people voting for reform? Yes, they want change. That they just need somebody who's going to deliver for them. And I fear that if they do elect reform as the default vote, they will be badly let down. That's my opinion.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's got 300,000 or 400,000 members of his party from a standing start. Can you see?
But he doesn't charge. He doesn't charge anything to be a member.
No, you could do the same thing for Restore Britain. Do you see
Restore Britain's growing? Is growing very fast, Chris. Don't worry. We're doing okay. We're very happy.
Could you see Restore Britain fielding candidates across the board?
Restore Britain is a movement. The only way I can see we're going to get our country back is if what I call the body of common sense within the country, which I think is still there, which is extremely polite, very decent. If they all align and we get a massive movement, then that movement could turn itself into a party, but that's a huge job, as I think we all agree. It could align itself with somebody who we think is going to deliver for the British people, or it might even do a reverse takeover of another party and restore that party to health. But I don't think any of us know. But I've been amazed by the support. I've been amazed about the amount of trust people have put in with me, not just with the rape gang inquiry, but also with Restore Britain. You probably know that the establishment had a run at me over last week over declarations of the rape gang inquiry, which, by the way, I'm a big donor to. I take nothing out of it, but declarations, people get very hung up on whether they've been made correctly. As it happened, everything had been done entirely properly, all in consultation with the Electoral Commission. But so that one disappeared. But then, I'm sure they'll chuck some other nonsense at me because I think they want to continue with a parliament full of eunuchs who basically does what they're told and relies on their peanut 93 grand a year salary to support their lifestyle, which as you know, I give to charity. So I just don't know what's going to happen now, but I want my country back, and I think there are an increasing number of people who agree with me.
Okay, now if there's an election, Rupert, you've got to vote the same as we've all got to vote. Nigel's got to vote. Leonie's got to vote. I have a vote. You have a vote, and if you don't have a Restore Britain candidate in where you're voting, and you have Reform and Labour and the Conservatives and the Lib Dems and the Greens, and you have to put your X against someone, what are you going to do? Not vote, or are you going to vote for one of those others?
I'll make my mind up as to whether I vote at all or who I vote for when the time comes. But who knows what's going to happen? I think if the economy collapses, I have a historical theory that democracy is not the norm. We've managed to make our constitutional democracy work so far, although it's been undermined recently. I think autocracy is a far more common form of government. And if your economy collapses, you tend to find it goes hand in hand with an autocratic movement, such as Herr Hitler, who we referred to earlier, which is why Germany became, as it did, a dictatorship. So I think the economy is key to it all, and I can only see economic gloom on the horizon. I see all the movers and shakers leaving, going to Antigua, where I know you spend some of your time, Chris. I was reading how easy it is to get Antiguan citizenship this morning. They're leaving for all countries, and they're not going to come back very quickly. And Labour don't seem to understand that you actually build an economy by letting the private sector do the job. Central planning doesn't work, as I have to keep telling these idiots in Parliament, who seem to think that the government makes better decisions than entrepreneurs, and they're just so wrong.
Okay.
So no, I'm just waiting. I'm waiting
Okay.
for the economic implosion, which is coming pretty shortly.
Okay, Ripple, I agree. I do travel a lot. I agree with you. I travel a lot, but I'm a British citizen. I have a UK passport, and I've always paid every single penny of every bit of tax I've ever owed to the country.
Did I say you didn't, Chris? Of course
No,
I
you
didn't say
didn't, but I just want to make that quite clear. And I'm asking you who you would vote for, and what you're saying. You're saying probably nobody, and you're predicting a scenario where the country collapses to the point where we have a totalitarian dictatorship take over.
No, I didn't say that. I said I obviously have an option of not voting, but equally, I will then have to wait until the election comes when I see who's actually on the ballot box and what their policies are, and then I can decide who I vote for. It's impossible to sit here and say that now. Reform don't have any policies that they've worked through. The policies, as far as I've said it publicly, I'll say it again, they sort of make them up in the pub, the Marquis of Granby, where they all used to go to, and they come up with them the next day. Usually haven't discussed them with the MPs. They certainly didn't discuss them with me. And most of them are completely bonkers, as I told Richard Tice, his energy policy is. I'm a man who's got a battery storage company and I've got a heat pump business, and nobody discussed it with me, and it was completely bonkers. But I think he was talking about taxing subsidies. I said to him, Richard, you don't tax subsidies, you just remove subsidies. You don't need to tax them. So no, I mean, honestly, there's not a lot of joined up thinking, and I don't know what's going to
Sounds
happen.
like, Rupert, you agree with me that a reform government might be a bit of a disaster then.
Well, I think your point was interesting about the 18-year-old running the Warwickshire County Council now with a 400 million budget. I think that's a bit of a joke.
Nigel, you've been listening to the conversation between what Rupert's having to say and Leonie. Where do you think this is all going to end up?
Well, I don't think reform is going to form the next government. I think we're going to end up back in the two-party system. What I'd really like to know at the end of this podcast is how Rupert is inclined to vote, as he's dodged that question several times.
Come on,
I can't answer that question until I see what the options are, Nigel. By the way, Leonie, what does AM stand for? Is that assembly member?
It is, yes. And
they haven't put MP against me. That's unfair.
Oh.
We will change it. We'll put MP against you.
Oh. Yes,
that's socialist bias, Chris.
That's clearly an outrage, Rupert, and it should say MP after your name.
I'm joking. I was trying to work out what it meant. I thought it might mean morning, and then I realised it was assembly member.
Yeah. Assembly member, and they used to be AMs in Wales. They still are in Northern Ireland, but in Wales they've now become MS, members of the Senedd.
Well, I'd reverse all that nonsense. I mean, devolution was a Blairite attempt to break up the proudest sovereign nation in Europe. So no, I will. That has to go. All that nonsense.
Okay.
The Senedd, the Scottish Parliament, all the fraud that goes with that stuff.
I think you're trying to introduce another giant topic.
That's another topic which needs we
can go on forever, and
more money, Nigel. More money to solve all our problems with.
The interesting thing is, at the end of the conversation, there was an awful lot we had in common. We had more in common than I would have thought, considering we're coming from very different parts of the political spectrum. It's been a very interesting conversation. I think we've nailed it just about. We've nailed something anyway. You've been listening to Right on the Nail with me, Chris Wright. Thank you very much to Leonie Cooper, Nigel Nelson, and Rupert Lowe MP for joining me. It's been great fun. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends and family, and make sure to hit the follow button on your podcast app. The podcast was produced by Tom Platts at soundsapien.com, and we are back with new episodes every month. So thanks for listening, and catch you all next time on Right on the Nail.
Bye.
I've hit the nail.